Hi everyone, and thanks for tuning in to our August edition of our National Quilting Circle live event with Heather Thomas. Again, she's going to be answering as many quilting questions as she possibly can in the next hour. If you've submitted your question beforehand, that's great. We're going to work through those as well. But you can also submit your questions live for the next hour. Do that by typing those into the comment section below the video. So we're going to start right off with a question from Deirdre, and she says, Heather, I have recently done your free motion quilting class and found it enormously helpful. Do you have any tips to regulate one's stitch length? I understand it's a balance between the machine speed and the movement of one's hand, but I'm struggling to maintain an even stitch length.
That is one of the hardest things, and it comes from practice. Now, first off, if your sewing machine has the ability to control the speed, meaning it's got some little slider or a knob that you can put the speed at like half speed or 3/4 speed, that's a great tool. So if it can go to half speed or go to 3/4 speed, set the machine there and then floor it all the time. Put your foot all the way down, pedal to the metal. It will keep it at that consistent speed, and then all you have to think about is how you're moving your hands. If you don't have a speed control, then you need to start listening. Turn the music off, listen to your machine. And when your machine goes just about starts to go into high gear, it will make a kind of a loud whirring sound. Stop just before that whirring sound or back off so that you're not hearing that whirring sound, and that's going to be at about 75% of the maximum. If you keep your foot on that pressure on the gas pedal, then again all you have to think about is how you're moving your hands. What happens is that you'll slow down and you'll speed up and you'll slow down and you'll speed up, and you're moving your hands at the same speed that whole time, and that's what gives you larger stitches and smaller stitches. So the goal is to keep your speed consistent because your hands probably already are. It's what we master those hands quicker than the foot. So find a way to keep your speed consistent with your foot, and you're going to have better consistent stitch length.
Perfect. All right, our next question here comes from Joan, and she says, how do I know if my colors clash?
Well, clash, I'm not sure what you mean by clash. I guess what you're asking is how do I know if my colors aren't working well with each other? One of the things about color is that, of course, everybody has a different preference. However, that being said, we want to make things that the average person is going to want to look at for longer than about 5 seconds, and we don't want to freak people's eyes out. One of the things that I've told my color students for years is when you choose the fabrics for a quilt, pull them all together, all the colors you think you're going to use, set them on the table so that they're kind of splayed out in the manner you're going to use them. If you're going to use about 70% violet and only about 20% yellow, then only have about 20% of that yellow showing. Set them on the table and walk away. Come back 5 minutes later, 20 minutes later, and look at it and ask yourself if it makes you happy. Are you pleased with it? If it's boring, it's going to make a boring quilt. If it's overwhelming, it's going to make an overwhelming quilt. So adjust. If it's boring, take some of the duller colors out, take some of the plainer fabrics out, and add some things that have more pizzazz. If it's overwhelming, then do the opposite. Take out some of those wild or very bright colors and put in something softer until you're pleased with it. Clashing isn't necessarily a bad thing. That simply means that you have high contrast. It's just what you do with that clashing. So again, try it before you've cut by manipulating your fabrics, looking at them, walking away, coming back, and see how it makes you feel. It should make you happy when you look at it. That's a great indicator. If it doesn't make you happy, if it makes you something else, then maybe some adjustments need to be made.
Good suggestions. This is another question that kind of goes along with that same topic, and it says, I'm returning to sewing and quilt piecing after about 15 unproductive years. I get stalled when picking fabrics that look good together for a quilt. Can you offer any guidelines to help me make better decisions for my projects?
Yes, absolutely. There are a lot of people who collect fabrics that they never use. There are a lot of people who go out and buy kits because they're afraid of fabrics. They're afraid of making those choices. Generally speaking, if you're making a pattern, if you're using some sort of guideline, the author of that pattern says you're going to need this many lights and this many darks and this many that and this many the other. She does that because she knows that that's going to give you an effect that is going to be similar to the one that she shows on the pattern. So if you like what's going on in the pattern, follow those guidelines. If it says 3 mediums and 4 darks and 6 lights, then do that. However, one of the things that we forget to do is we don't have enough variety. A lot of people will go and buy all of the fabrics from one line, and they all look too similar. Even if they have very different designs on them, one has stripes and one has polka dots and one has flowers, they generally have all the same value or color scale. All the pinks are the same, all the violets are the same, all the greens are the same. And it's better if you go and choose a variety of pinks if you're going to use pink, or a variety of greens if you're going to use greens. Remember that to make a really attractive whatever, you need to have unity and variety and balance. Unity is what makes it all look like it belongs. Variety is what makes it interesting. It keeps us wanting to go back and look some more. And then balance comes from placing those things in such a way that everything looks like it belongs. So if you look at your fabrics that you've chosen and you say to yourself, oh, this is kind of boring, that means you lack variety. If you look at it and say, oh my gosh, it looks like chaos, that means that you have too much variety and not enough unity. So those questions are great to ask yourself. Is it unified? Does it have variety? I hope that helps.
Perfect. We have another question here that just came in, and this is from Judy. And she says, is there a formula for choosing binding?
For your quilt, for choosing the binding, there's no formula per se, but generally speaking, you want to repeat something that's already in the quilt. That does not mean it has to be the same fabric. So if you've run out of all your fabrics and you're freaking out, you don't have to go find that same fabric again, but you need to repeat a color, a dominant color. You definitely want to go dark or medium dark. Don't end your fabric, your quilt light, because that binding will get dirty. So, you know, white is not a good option. Off-white is not a good option. So what I always do is, if I have enough fabric, I choose something from one of the borders and use that for the binding. Or if I have a main fabric that's my popper that I use for a great accent, I'll put that on as the binding. And let's say I've finished my quilt and I'm out of all of my fabrics. I don't have enough of anything. Sometimes I'll piece together all my scraps and use those for a binding too. So no, there's no hard, fast rules, except don't end light. Go with something dark and match a color from the body of your quilt.
Perfect. All right, our next question comes from someone who is following you all the way from Argentina, and she says that I am new to this and I admire everything you make. My question is, from where do I start a project?
This is a great question, and I have watched students struggle with this forever. And I have this little plan, or a planograph, if you will, that I do whenever I start a quilt, and I always suggest this with students. So if you have a pattern in mind, you're going to follow its instructions for how many fabrics you need and that sort of stuff. But if you don't have a pattern in mind, you're going to kind of guesstimate what you're going to do. But either way, what I suggest is that you either go to your stash, or go to your stash and then the store, or go to the store and then your stash, whatever it is you need to do, and pull forth the fabrics that you want to play with. And I say the fabrics that you want to play with because every time you go to create something, you're in a different mood. And sometimes I'll go to my stash and I want to play with, you know, blues. And so I pull out all my blues, and then I see a fabric that's got some goldenrod in it, and so I go find the goldenrods from my stash that I'm going to use as an accent. And then I think, well, if I'm going to go with blue and goldenrod and I want some background, then maybe I need some, you know, white or some gray or something, and I'll pull that. And if I think I want to add some embellishments of any sort, I pull that too. And I put this pile of stuff in front of me. And I look at it and I say, you know, this is kind of cool. I like it. There's enough variety. There's enough unity. Everything looks like it belongs. But, you know, maybe there isn't anything bright enough, so I'll go grab something bright. Or I think, I like this, but I think I need one more color, so I'll go grab another color. Once it's all in front of me, that gives me a better idea of what I can do now. I can look at it and say, okay, well, I've got tons of blue, so I can, you know, run with blue, and I can use these other two colors as accents. How much work do I want to do? Do I want to piece really intricate blocks? Do I want to do applique? Do I want to do layered techniques, which is what I always want to do these days because it's the lazy man's quilt or lazy woman's quilt. And then I start playing, and so I'll make one of something, one block. And if I like it, I'll make some more. If I don't like it, I'll do something else. What I never do, me personally, is design a quilt and then make that quilt. Once I've designed the quilt, I'm kind of done. To go and piece it at that point, I'd be kind of bored. I much prefer to create a block, create a something, and decide whether or not I want to keep going. And I think that's a really good way of creating, and it's the way that so many artists create. They simply jump in, they do one thing, and if they like it, they do it again. If they don't like it, they do something else. So try pulling together the things you want to play with, look at them for inspiration, look through some quilt books and see if there's anything that interests you, or grab your pattern that you've been dying to do, and see how that pile of yummy stuff that you pulled together wants to work together, and just play. Play is really important. Play.
Perfect. Well, so I have kind of a follow-up to that, because I know I'm probably your exact opposite, and I don't know if I could sit down and come up with something out of a pile of fabric. And so if I was just starting, I would probably pick an already designed pattern. Is that something you would recommend doing too, to sort of
Absolutely.
just feel like something?
Yeah. If you have a pattern that you want to do, grab that pattern and look at the instructions and say, if the instruction says this is what you need, then go to your stash, go to your whatever, and do that. But one of the things I always suggested to my students for years and years and years, take that pattern and change one thing out of it. If it hasn't got any applique on it, throw some applique. If it's got applique blocks and you don't want to applique, find a different block and throw it in with that block that's in the pattern. If it's got a straight set, do a diagonal set instead. Do something to make that piece more yours. Because if you didn't design the fabric and you didn't design the quilt, and if you're going to hand it to a long armer, whose quilt is it if all you do is piece it? Well, whereas if you love piecing and you don't really want to do any of those other things, do something to take that other person's design and make it more personal to you by changing it up in some small way. I think you'll be happier.
I like it. All right. This is kind of a follow-up, because you mentioned going to your stash and picking fabric. So Donna wants to know, she says, I'm new to quilting and would like to start a stash of material that I can use in future quilts. How much of one pattern should I buy at a time?
Well, Donna, I love that you asked this question because, again, I think I said earlier that there are fabric collectors, there are quilters who actually use their stash, and then there are people who simply buy for each project. And none of those is right or wrong. What I say is whatever doesn't hurt your budget. I hate to see people go into debt to do quilting. I hate to see people's husbands get mad at them because of the amount of money they're spending for quilting. So definitely stay within your comfort level when it comes to that. Now, there are literally thousands upon thousands of quilters out there who have more fabric than they're ever going to use. And it's a really easy way to look at your stash and say, you know, how much fabric is going to be there when I die? A lot of people are looking at it and they're going to have a lot of fabric there when they die, and their husbands are going to have to deal with it, or their kids are going to have to deal with it. So unless you are, you know, really thinking about being a fabric hoarder, go step carefully. I always suggest that you get your basics, and people forget to buy basics, and that's the problem. That's why so many people don't use their stash. What they do is they go out and buy beautiful fabric, and then they get it home and they've got nothing to use with it. For every beautiful fabric, one that's got lots of different print on it and lots of different colors, you need at least 5 or 6 plain fabrics, meaning they have a tone-on-tone design. Light purple stripes on a dark purple ground, light green circles on a dark green ground, mottling of gray on a darker gray. These are very, very useful fabrics. So the bulk of your stash should be made up of useful fabrics rather than those beautiful, multicolored, wild, wonderful, fabulous prints. And if you want to use those prints, you need to make sure that you have those really useful fabrics to work with them. And that does not necessarily mean the rest of the fabrics in that print's line. It means that you need to get wonderful things called blenders. And most quilt stores will have a section that says blenders, and that's where you need to go and say, okay, well, I've got no yellow, so I'm going to buy a light yellow, a medium yellow, and a dark yellow. And next time when I go shopping, I'm going to buy blues or whatever. Now, when it comes to amounts, it depends on what size quilts you make. If you make bed quilts, I would never buy less than a ½ yard. If you make mostly small quilts, then you can get by with quarter yards and fat quarters. But if you make mostly bed quilts, fat quarters aren't going to do you a lot of good, okay? So keep that in mind. But I rarely buy anything more than a yard of any one fabric because I'd rather have a greater variety. For the longest time, I was a single mom, didn't have a lot of money, so I bought third yards. I didn't like the way quarter yards washed up. They were too skinny and they'd get all wrinkly. And I could get 3 for the yard price instead of 2 if I bought ½ yards, so I always bought thirds, and generally it was enough. But I like to use 30 or 40 fabrics in a quilt. If you only like to use 5 or 6 different fabrics in a quilt, then you might want to buy yards instead of ½ yards. But rarely do you need more than that. When you go to the quilt store, the very first thing I've always done in every quilt store is go straight to the sale section. And when I'm in the sale section, I look and see if there's any fabrics there that are colors that I tend to use a lot. And if there are, I will buy backing fabric at that time, especially if it's $2 or $3 a yard. I'm getting first quality fabric for a really, really good price, and I can buy 6 or 8 yards and use it for the backing, and so that saves a lot of money. But that's the only time when I buy huge amounts. Otherwise, ½ yard to a yard is more than enough.
Perfect. I have to say, I can't ever resist the little fat quarters. I have more of those than I'll probably ever need. They're just perfect to get. All right, our next question that just came in is from Patsy, and she says, how do you recommend blocking a quilt?
Well, blocking a quilt, my first question is why? If you're going to be hanging a quilt, then yes, it probably needs to be blocked. If you're going to be using a quilt on a bed, chances are all it needs to do is be laundered. And once you launder it and put it on the bed, it's going to hang well unless there's issues with it. So blocking a quilt is generally for something that you're going to put on the wall. And I'm going to kind of go backwards here. If you pieced properly and didn't have a lot of fullness in it, and then you basted properly so you didn't have any puckers or pleats, and then you quilted properly so that it's got an equal distribution of quilting across the surface, your quilt doesn't need to be blocked. Okay, so blocking is something we have to do if we haven't really hit the mark all the way along the line. So if you get to the end of the making of the quilt and you finished it, you put the binding on it, and you realize that the top of the quilt is 36 inches and the bottom of the quilt is 37 inches, and it's going to hang weird, that means that you need to stretch out that top and shrink down that bottom. So what I do, I don't like to work with a totally wet quilt. I like to work with a damp quilt. So I will take the quilt and I will spritz it with a spray bottle. And then I have one of those cardboard dressmakers. I'm not even sure what it's called, but it folds out 3 ways. I think mine is 5 feet square once it's folded out, and it has a grid on it. Anything that has a grid is helpful. If you don't have anything with a grid, then you need a T-square. And basically what I do is when my quilt is good and wet, moist, not wet all the way through, the batting isn't saturated or anything, I pin one corner in a corner of the grid, and then I pull it and pin it in the other corner where it's supposed to be, and then I do the same thing in the other 2 corners. Then I start putting pins in between, and basically what I'm doing is relaxing one little portion and stretching another little portion and holding it in place on that grid that I know is straight. And if you don't have a grid, then use the T-square, and then I let it dry there. And that's called blocking, and that's the way I do it. Sometimes I'll have to get out my steam iron and steam a particular area to get it to pool without pulling open any seams or anything like that, because you don't want to pull it hard. And I have to steam an area to stretch it as much as I need to stretch it. If you're finding that you have to block all of your quilts, then I would think about, looking at those first 3 steps and making sure that I'm doing them as best as I can so I don't have to end up blocking. If it only happens every once in a while, which it can, especially for wall quilts that you want to, kind of be perfectly square, that's not an issue. But try not to have to block is my issue, my recommendation, I guess. But that's the best way that I know how to block a quilt.
Perfect. All right, I just want to remind anyone, even if you've been watching from the very beginning or are just tuning in, if you have any questions for Heather, feel free to submit those in the comment section below the video. We're going to continue working our way through as many questions as we can. So our next question is about batting, and it comes from Lori, and she says, what is the coolest batting to use for summer quilts so I don't overheat during the night?
Cotton, cotton, cotton. Okay, so we've got cotton batting, we've got wool batting, silk batting, bamboo batting, and polyester batting, and blends of all of these things. Oh, and I think I don't know if I said silk or not, and silk. So of all of the battings, cotton is the coolest. So you can get a very thin, lightweight cotton batting and use that. That's great for summer coverlets. In fact, that's what's on my bed right now. Of all the battings, the warmest is silk. People think it's wool, but that's not true. It's silk. Silk is warmer than anything else. Silk can also be quite cool, depending on how you use that silk. It's a great fabric for all weathers. Unfortunately, most of the silk battings have other things in them, and so not going to be as cool as the cotton is going to be. So cotton is coolest, silk is warmest, wool is the second warmest, bamboo is the second coolest. So it's almost as cool as cotton, but not quite. But a cotton bamboo blend is wonderful. The grossest would be polyester. And polyester, if you've ever gone out and bought yourself a $59.99 bed in a bag and taken it home and thrown it on your bed and tried to sleep under that comforter, you found that you sweat. And that's the problem with polyester, is that it traps heat and does not wick away moisture. So you sweat, even if it's got a cotton cover on it, you sweat underneath the polyester batting, whereas the cotton doesn't trap heat, but it does wick away moisture. So even if you get sweaty underneath there, it's going to wick away the moisture, and you're not going to stay all wet and sweaty. The wool and the silk, because they have animal fibers that have barbs on them, they interlock, and so they trap heat. But because they're natural fibers, they also wick away moisture, so you don't sweat under them. You stay nice and toasty warm. So anyway, cotton's the lightest and the coolest, and silk is going to be your warmest, and then wool follows that, and then on the other end, bamboo is your next best bet for coolness, but stay away from that polyester.
See, I should have met you years and years ago, and you could have told me that before I went and bought one. All right. Our next question here is about some embellishment supplies, and Peggy wants to know where you purchase most of your supplies, such as the fabric iron foil and the great paints that you use.
Okay, well, for years and years and years I've owned my own quilt store, and so I've always been able to wholesale those things in, and I know they're very hard for a lot of people to find. One of your best bets is to simply Google the name of the thing that you want. If you want to use jacquard paints, then Google jacquard, and something's going to come up for you. However, that being said, almost every art supply store that I know of sells the jacquard paints. So you can go to dickblick.com and get them from them. But my absolute favorite for almost everything is Dharma Trading. That's DHARMA Trading, TRADING.com. And they are quick. They almost always have everything in stock, and they get it to you really quickly, and it's all there. So that's really, really nice. Now, if it's a weird thing like fabric foil, then I would, again, Google fabric foil. Now, I know that you can get fabric foil and Shiva paint sticks and that sort of stuff from lots of different independent little people who have these little stores. So Google them, and then a great thing is if you get Quilting Arts magazine or any of the art quilting magazines that are out there, Cloth, Paper, Scissors, any of those things, in the back they have great advertisements, lots of websites for all those different wonderful things, great resources, and you can go to their online places too and see those resources. So Google is a great place to go and search, and if you can't find it there, email me and I'll see if I can help you find it.
Perfect. All right. The next question here just came in, and it's from Linda. And she says, for a wall hanging, do you put weights in the bottom corners? And if so, what do you use?
No. If you put weights just in the bottom corners, what's going to happen is those corners are going to pull down. If you get a wall hanging finished and you find that it's got wobbly sides and so it's not going to hang well, instead just simply put another, you've got a casing along the top to put the pole for hanging, put another casing down along the bottom and put another pole down at the bottom. So that weight is going all the way across and just not in the corners. And that's going to make it hang fabulously. I put that casing at the bottom of every single wall piece I do. So all of my wall pieces that aren't mounted on something else have that sleeve at the bottom and the sleeve at the top, and that way they're going to hang really well against the wall. It also brings them away from the wall ever so slightly so that they're raised off that surface just a bit, and they look better too.
And I believe you even did a video for us on different ways that you can hang art quilts. So even
yeah,
maybe not necessarily just wanting a straight rod across the top or bottom, but lots of different creative ways.
Yeah.
Yes, that video, yeah, again, is on our website. You can check that one out if you want some more creative ways to hang your quilts for your next one. Our next question here is about a certain fabric, and Melody wants to know what are the go-to guidelines for sewing and quilting silk dupioni.
I like that question too. Now, here's the question though, and this is an issue. What type of silk dupioni? So we have Chinese dupioni and we have Indian dupioni. Chinese dupioni is a little bit more like another type of silk, chanteuse, and it moves a bit, and it's a little bit difficult. Whereas the Indian dupioni, that's the one that has the big slubs in it, and so you can see the stripe in there of the weave. And for that, I don't do anything different. I don't put any type of stabilizer on it. I just treat it like it's cotton, and it behaves pretty much like cotton. I can use it with cotton or any other type of fabric. It doesn't stretch. The only problem is if I'm cutting it in really small pieces and it's got really big slubs in it. So I wouldn't use it in something that I was going to paper piece that had minute little sections. I use it in areas that are bigger. Whereas the Chinese dupioni that doesn't have the slubs in it, what I use for it is a very lightweight, permanent, non-woven, iron-on interfacing. So I'll say that again. It's permanent, lightweight, non-woven, iron-on interfacing. And you just buy that at your local fabric store, and you iron it to the fabric before you cut it. And then it will behave just like cotton. And it's so lightweight that it really doesn't add any extra bulk to your piecing.
Do you have to worry about washing how you launder the silk at all when you put it in your quilts?
Well, silk is stronger than cotton. People seem to think that silk is delicate. It's actually stronger than cotton. I'm a pre-washer, so I pre-wash everything. And I like to know what my fabric's going to do before I use it. I want to know if it's going to wrinkle up. I want to know if it's going to shrink. I want to know if it's going to shred. I want to know what it's going to behave like. And so the best indicator of that is to launder it first. So I always do that. So I get to know my fabrics. So no, you don't have to treat it any differently than you would a cotton fabric. If you're a pre-washer, pre-wash everything. If you're not a pre-washer, don't pre-wash anything.
Perfect. All right. Our next question here just came in, and this is from Judy. And she says, what is the best way to attach a quilt label, and what information should be on it?
Yeah, well, that's a big question there, the quilt label. The quilt police would say that it needs to be put on the bottom left-hand corner. That's like the standard from the big organizations. And your best way to do it is twofold. I believe that it should be hand-stitched on, so I turn the edges and hand-stitch those edges. But before that, I put an iron-on adhesive on it. Now, the reason I do both is I don't want a raw edge for my label. So that's why I turn the edges and hand-stitch it, because then, if you machine-stitch it, it would go through to the front, and that wouldn't look good. But the reason I put the iron-on adhesive on is that it makes it harder for somebody to take it off. Okay? When quilts get stolen from big shows, and they get stolen during the put-up and the takedown process is generally when that happens. So if you enter your quilts in lots of shows, this is something you need to think about. But when they get stolen from shows, the very first thing the person does is find that label and pull it off. So I always suggest that in addition to that label, if you feel like you need to put a label on, is to sign your quilt in the quilting. So learn how to write your name in machine quilting and sign the front of the quilt. put it in a little inner border, put it in the outer border, hide it somewhere where you don't want to see it or whatever, but put it in the quilting. That way you know where that signature is. Chances are somebody who takes that quilt isn't going to know where that signature is and is not going to be able to rip it out. So that's a way of kind of adding extra security. Now when it comes to the information on the quilt, that's up to you. You can put all kinds of information. I've seen people who put so much information on their label it's like a book. But your name, the year, who it was made for, if it was made for somebody, the name of the quilt, and that's really all you need. Some people like to put a little bit about the inspiration. I think it should be kept simple. I don't think it should be anything crazy. You should, if you're giving it to somebody, you write a letter and include it with the quilt, and they can store that letter. I don't think the label needs to have all that stuff on it, but that is definitely a personal opinion. But sign your quilts in the quilting. Nobody's going to see that and be able to take it out, so it makes it secure.
Perfect. And if anyone out there is interested in learning how to do the free motion script writing, Heather's also done a class on that as well, and can give you a good idea on how to learn how to do that lettering and stuff in quilting. So we're about halfway through our live event. Again, if you have questions, submit those underneath the video in the comment section, and we'll keep working through those questions as much as we can. I also want to take the time to remind everyone that they can still download the free Ultimate Sewing Machine Guide on the website. Again, it's a guide that has all sorts of information about how to choose a machine, how to set it up, use it, care for it, clean it, all sorts of maintenance tips. Really great resource to have. So moving on, our next question just came in, and it's from Alice. And she says, I have applicators that do not have the iron-on wonder under. Can I still apply the wonder under to iron on my material?
I'm not sure I understand that. I have
She's talking about doing applique and using using a wonder under that's necessarily an interfacing, not a wonder under. Maybe it's not a two-sided adhesive.
I don't know.
Sure how it works. All right, so Alice, if you're watching, we're going to need some follow-up on that question, and we'll get it figured out.
Yeah.
All right. Our next questions here are about caring for older quilts. And Phyllis wants to know, how do I get age marks out of a quilt that has been stored for too long?
Well, that question is kind of ambiguous. I'm not sure what you mean by age marks. So I'm going to kind of address two different things. Fold lines, and that would be something that's going to happen in an older quilt that's been stored for too long. Fold lines, basically what happens is that when you fold a quilt up, or any type of fabric that has a batting in it especially, basically you're changing the memory of that fabric and changing it to want to have that fold line in it. So your first thing you're going to do is you're going to spread the quilt out and let it relax for a couple of days, flat, on top of a bed or whatever. You could put it between your mattress and your box spring too, laid out flat, and that weight will help. But first, that's the first thing you want to do, is to get all of those fold lines to relax. Then you're going to take a steam iron, and you're going to leave it where it's at on the bed, and you're not going to iron the quilt at all. You're not going to let the iron touch the quilt. You're going to hover the iron over the folded areas, and you're going to push your steamer on your iron and let steam go into them. And then you're going to let it relax and dry for another day or two, however long it takes to get dry. That should take care of most fold lines. What you don't want to do is iron fold lines, because basically what you're going to do is iron the fold into it. So if you don't get the fold lines out entirely, then re-steam the quilt. Re-steam the quilt, sometimes I've seen people have to do it 3 or 4 times, but that is the best way to get out a fold line. Now, if you're talking about watermarks or dirt marks or whatever on a quilt, then that's old. There are a couple of different products that are out on the market that people confuse quite a bit. One is called Synthropol, and the other is called Retain. And Retain is what you would want to launder an older quilt with. You can also use just Orvis soap, which is a soap that's used for washing animals, farm animals mostly. It's a very mild soap. But it is a detergent, whereas you may not want to use a detergent. The Retain, what it does is it pushes all of the color that's in the fabric back into the fabric and holds it in place. so that you're not going to get a lot of fading when you launder an older quilt. Synthrapol does the opposite thing. Synthrapol is what hand dyers use. And what it does is it pulls out the excess color, suspends it in the water so that it can't go back down on the quilt. And so that's not what you want to use for an older quilt. You do not want the color pulled out. You want it to be pushed in and kept there. So if it's, you know, faded, if it's dirty, that's the first thing I would do is I would launder it with Retain. And I'm not going to wash it by hand because I'm not going to work that hard. I'm going to put it in my washing machine. If it has my washing machine has a spinning that actually spins, then I'm not going to let that happen. So I'll stop it for the spin, and then I'll just drain it, and then I'll fill it up again and let it rinse, stop the spin, drain it. A lot of the new machines don't have that spinning activator anymore, and so they're really safe for laundering quilts in now. But if you've got stains, there are a couple of different stain removers on the market. I do not like any of them. So my suggestion for stains is a toothbrush and baking soda. So with a little bit of water. So I get my toothbrush wet, I put it in the baking soda, and I very lightly scrub the stain. This helps with watermarks too. So if it's gotten wet somewhere along the line and there's a line where it got wet and it dried, but that line is still there, then this works really well. But that is what I prefer to use on older quilts. Again, Retain is what you want to launder with, not Synthrapol. Not Synthrapol. That is for brand new fabrics and hand-dyed fabrics, not for old quilts. And if you've got wrinkle marks, steam, steam, steam.
Great. Okay. Our next question here is from Stephanie. And she says, when quilting a quilt that has an applique, like initials, do you think you should quilt through the applique or quilt around it?
Around it. Around it, around it, around it. In fact, I don't even like quilting over one section of a block into another section of the block. I believe that we should always respect the piecing or the applique or whatever's on the surface. So if there's a star piece in the surface, I need to quilt around the star and within the star rather than over the whole surface of the star. So if there's applique, I don't want to quilt over the applique. I want to quilt around the applique, perhaps maybe a little bit of stitching inside the applique to add some, you know, embellishment of some sort. But respect the piecing, respect the applique, respect the embroidery.
Okay. We just got an update, a clarification on Alice's question, and she says she wants to know if it's okay to put fusible Wonder Under on an applique that has already been cut out. She needs to apply these to her quilt.
Well, yeah, you can, but then you're going to have to cut out again. So if you've already cut out the applique pieces and you want to then, so you're going to set those onto your Wonder Under. You want to make sure you use a Teflon pressing sheet on top, so that you can press it and then cut away the excess. What you don't want to do is cut the Wonder Under the same shape and try to line those two things up. That's never going to work. So just use a Teflon pressing sheet so the excess Wonder Under that's around your piece is managed. So yeah, you can do it.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that, Alice. All right. Our next question here is from Stephanie, and she says, should all quilts have the capacity to do free motion? I can't seem to get the hang of it on my Husqvarna. I think she means quilting machines.
Yes. Yes, all machines can free motion. That being said, some machines like it better than others. Your Husqvarna Viking, I don't know if it's new or old or somewhere in between. If you told me what it was, I'd be able to give you a better idea, but let me kind of walk you through a few things. 90% of the time when you're struggling with machine quilting, it is human error, not machine issues. 90% of the time. You're doing something wrong with your machine, or you've decided it's difficult, and therefore it is. So if you want it to be easier, your very first thing you have to do is decide that it's going to be easier. We all manifest, you know, the crap in our head into the things that we do. So if I want something to be fun and easy, then it's going to be fun and easy. If I want something to be difficult, if somebody's told me machine quilting is difficult and I believe that, then it's going to be difficult. So that's something that, you know, you have to think about. But then go to your manual. People forget that they have this wonderful thing called a manual, and read exactly how your machine wants to be set up for free motion quilting and do that. If you're still having problems, I need to know what those problems are. Is it because your quilt is bunching up? Is your thread breaking? There's so many different things that can happen, but I'm going to kind of manage those. Make sure that you have basted your quilt well. That means however you're basting, if you're thread basting, if you're pin basting, if you're safety pin basting, that there should be something every 6 inches at the farthest apart. I prefer the size of my fist, which is about a 3-inch square. So there's going to be something every 3 inches when I quilt. That means all those 3 layers are being held together really well. So number one, make sure it's well basted. Then you want to make sure that everything's threaded properly, and that's the second most common thing, is that you've got the top threaded wrong or the bobbin threaded wrong and things aren't working well. Make sure you have a brand new needle in, and make sure you change that needle every 2 to 4 hours. Now if you're piecing, you can go longer than that, but when you're machine quilting free motion, you're pulling that needle constantly, and every time you pull that needle, you bend it just a little bit, and you're bending it and bending it, bending it, bending it, bending it, and it will start messing with the tolerances of your machine and make your machine sound loud and noisy. So it needs to be changed. It needs to be changed when it's dull, which is every 4 hours, but definitely when it's bent, which when you're machine quilting is going to be sooner. So every 2 to 4 hours, change that needle, and make sure your machine is clean. So read your manual, make sure your machine is clean, make sure you have a new needle in, make sure things are properly threaded, and then breathe. Sit back, relax, calm down. If you've never quilted before, why are you quilting on a quilt that's important? Put some junky fabrics together with batting in between and practice. Practice until it feels good. Practice until you know how your machine wants to be approached. Practice until you feel like, okay, I can do this now. Don't practice on your quilt. Wait until you have at least a modicum of security in that machine quilting. So set that quilt aside, do some practicing, figure out the relationship you have with that machine, because every machine can do it, and start to dance with that machine. Start to look at it as your dance partner instead of as your foe. It needs to be your friend. So practice first.
Absolutely. All right, our next question here is from Lisa, and she wants to know how you attach your binding, back to front or front to back. Do you machine or hand stitch it, and how do you ensure you catch the back side with your stitching?
Okay. Well, when I put a binding on, which these days is very rare because I'd much rather do anything else than put a binding on, sometimes I just leave the raw edges. I put colored batting in so it can show. There's all sorts of other things that you can do. But when I put a binding on, I put it on the old-fashioned way. I use a double French, which means it's doubled over. I cut my bindings 2 inches and just iron them together, wrong sides together, and I sew it on the front, and then I roll it over to the back and hand stitch it. Now, that is how you do it if you're going to hand stitch it. If you're going to machine quilt or machine stitch it, you do it the opposite. You sew it on the back, pull it over to the front, and stitch it down on the front. Okay, so that's the difference. It's not that you can do both the same way. They're both done differently. Machine done, you sew it on the back and pull it to the front, and then machine stitch. Hand done, you sew it on the front, pull it to the back, and hand stitch.
Okay, and I know we've got several videos on bindings also that you can watch on our website. All right, Sandy asks, do you have any advice on how to test the water in national quilt competitions or contests? I've been quilting for about 20 years and beginning to design and would like to enter some competitions, but I don't know where to begin.
Well, I'm probably the wrong person to ask. I don't believe in competition much at all, and I definitely don't believe in competition in the quilting arena or the arts arena. So, yeah, if you want to enter shows, I think probably one of the things that I would do is I would go back on their websites and see who won the last couple of years and look at the quilts. However, that being said, if it's a different judge the next year, it doesn't matter who won the last time, because these judges are human, and though they're trained to judge a quilt based on workmanship and how well it's going to hold up under this, that, and the other, and blah blah blah, it's mostly personal decision, and every judge will tell you no, their personal decision doesn't come into play, but I'm here to tell you it does. We can't help it. I have critiqued thousands and thousands and thousands of quilts in my color and design classes and tried everything I could to keep my personal opinion out, but you know, we're human and it's very hard to do that. So if you're going to make quilts for competition, keep that in mind. When people come to me and I start teaching them to quilt, whether it's teaching them the skill of machine quilting or teaching them the skill of design or whatever, I say, you know, who are you quilting to? Are you quilting to the quilt, meaning you're going to do what's best for the quilt all the time? Are you quilting to your own pleasure, meaning you're going to do whatever's fun for you regardless of whether or not it's good for the quilt? Or are you quilting to the judge? And if you're quilting to the judge, you need to go to AQS or NQA, whichever one's left, I don't know if either of them are left at this point, and see what their judging parameters are. Or ask somebody else that you know who's put a quilt in a show and say, can I look at the paperwork they gave you afterwards so I can see what those quilting parameters are. But be prepared, you know, your points need to match, your seams need to line up, your quilting needs to be equal across the surface, your stitch length needs to be the same all the time, your binding needs to be full, no play in that binding. It needs to hug the edge of the quilt. The miters and the corners of the binding need to be stitched down. There's just all sorts of rules that are put in place because they know that that's going to serve the quilt well. It's going to give it a long life. The problem is when it comes into eye appeal or into design, most, I'm going to say at least half the judges out there aren't really trained in that area, and so they're going to go with whatever they like the most, and there's nothing you can really do about that. You could follow judges around and see what they picked every year and then play to that judge if you want to. I know there's some competitive quilters who do that, and be prepared that there are competitive quilters out there, and that's all they do is make quilts for competitions. They have studied what's going to win, and they make, you know, perfect cold quilts. So I'm a little opinionated about it.
All right. All right. Our next question here says, I just made a quilt that the pattern said to press the seams open. Oh, let me see. Pattern said to press the seams open. Then it says to stitch in the ditch. Do I do that? Wouldn't stitching right in the ditch stress the thread where pieces were put together?
Yeah, that's the last thing you'd want to do. If something is pressed open, you want to stitch outside the ditch so that you can kind of make it a little bit more sturdy. I'm wondering why it was needed to be pressed open. I'm assuming it's because it had a lot of bulk in the seam area. That's one of those rare occasions when stitching across that seam so that your quilting goes from one section across the seam into the other section is what's going to give you the sturdiest machine quilting. So if you've got background area that's common, but there's a seam in it and that seam was pressed open, stitching over that is going to make that seam stronger. Definitely do not stitch in the ditch. Anything but the ditch. The ditch is for drummers.
Okay.
It's hard to stay
All
there.
right. Our next question here says, I saw a product advertised for a spray grip that is sprayed on the bottom of rulers to help keep the fabric from slipping. She doesn't remember what the product's name was and wondered if you had any recommendations for helping to keep rulers from moving. Yes,
I do. Omnigrip is a great ruler. It has its own little stuff in it, but if you already have your own rulers, there's all sorts of little things that you can stick on the bottom. My favorite is the little sandpaper discs because they're the thinnest and the ruler still lays flat on the fabric. However, that being said, it takes you longer to cut if you have something on the bottom of your ruler to keep it from slipping, because that means you have to lift it up and reposition it instead of sliding it. So there is a wonderful little trick. I'm going to put my hand up here, and that's your pinky finger. Your pinky finger put at the edge of the ruler will help keep it from slipping. Also, no flat hands. Don't put your hand flat against the ruler. Keep your hand raised on the ruler like this. So this hand is the ruler, this hand is the one that's holding it, and I keep it raised with my pinky on the edge. When I do this, the ruler isn't going to move. If my hand is flat and I put pressure on it, it pushes it. So a raised hand, pinky on the edge of the ruler so that it touches the fabric will help keep it sturdy. And that's how I cut. And then it doesn't move, and it's wonderful.
Perfect. And I think you did just film a quick little tip about that recently that should be going up on our website soon, so we'll have another visual to add along with your hand demonstration there. All right, next question. Kathy asks, a friend has asked me to make a t-shirt quilt for her son from all of his t-shirts. She's been quilting for over 30 years but has never done a t-shirt quilt before. She says her question is, how do I give her a price? I have no idea how long it will take or how much work is involved in quilting this type of quilt.
I guess the question is, have you made quilts for other people before? If this is mostly just your labor, because she's going to provide you with the t-shirts. I don't know if there's going to be any fabric that goes in between, but if she's going to buy the batting or the backing, you need to consider the cost of your hours, your time, and the cost of any additional things you use, like thread or whatever. So what I do is I always start with my supplies. And whatever I paid for the supplies, I multiply by 3. And that is the cost of the quilt before I've put any labor into it. So if you have to go buy batting and backing fabric and thread, and it costs you $75, you're going to multiply that by 3. And so you're going to have $225 as your base. And then you decide how much you're worth an hour. Well, I'm not doing anything for less than $30 an hour. That's just the way I am. And so I would charge $30 an hour, and I would have to guesstimate. It's going to take me about this much time to put the backing on each of those t-shirts before I cut them out. Then I have to cut them out. Then I have to sew together the top, and if I'm quilting it, then I have to baste it, and then I have to quilt it. So if I think it's going to take me probably 15 hours, I'm going to suggest that it's going to take 20. I'm going to add extra 5 in, and 5 times $30, I said 15, 20 hours. So 20 hours times 30 is $600, plus that $225, $825 is what I would charge to make that t-shirt quilt. I doubt anybody's going to want to pay that. And that my thought is have her come over and I'll teach her how to make a t-shirt quilt. She can make the darn thing herself. But if you're going to make it for your friend and you want to keep it, if you're doing it for your friend, make sure that you're paying yourself at least $10 an hour. Your friend wants you to make at least $10 an hour. Always suggest that it's going to cost more than you think it's going to. You can always lower the price later. It's hard to raise the price later. So if you tell her $600, and when you get done, you realize it was a lot easier than you thought it was, and you can say, you know what, I don't need the $600. We can do it for $450 or whatever. So always go a little bit higher. But keep in mind that there's extra steps in that t-shirt quilt. You have to put iron-on interfacing on the back of all those t-shirts before you can cut it out. So make sure you keep track of your time too, and then consider the fact that basting it takes some time too if you're going to machine quilt it.
Absolutely. And I think that's good advice for anybody making a quilt for somebody, is to not undervalue how much time you're putting into it, because I think people who don't necessarily sew or quilt don't know how much time you're actually putting into it. So if you lay it out like that, it's a little bit easier for them to see what they're paying for.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Our next question here comes from Susan, and she says, when you are explaining washing a quilt and not spinning it, then how do you dry it?
Well, you can spin it. You don't want to agitate it. I couldn't remember the word before. Spinning in one direction is okay for a quilt. Agitating back and forth like this damages the quilt. It pulls the seams. So yes, you can spin it, so you can put it through that final spin. Just don't let it agitate. So then, depending on how you are going to use the quilt its whole life, and how long you want the quilt to last, you can air dry it for longer life. Drying quilts, it just shortens their life, and washing quilts shortens their life. But I like to use my quilts up until they fall apart, and then there's more quilts. Some people want every little quilt that they make to be an heirloom. And if that's the case, then don't use that quilt. So yeah, you can spin it, just don't agitate it. So sorry about that confusion. I just couldn't find the word.
Perfect. All right. Our next question here comes from Helen, and she says, I have cut out a hexagon pattern that I want to make. I have not been quilting long, so working on material that is cut against the grain, I'm worried about sewing it together. Is there an easy way to make sure that I do not stretch it out?
If you've already cut them out, I'll address that in a second. If you haven't already cut them out, what I would say is, if you pre-washed your fabrics, heavily starch them. Because when you heavily starch fabrics, they don't stretch as much when you use them. Since you've already cut them out and you haven't heavily starched them, you don't want to do that now, because every time you go to iron those pieces, when you pull on the bias, it's going to deform, misshape them and make them deformed hexagons, and we don't want to do that. So one of the things that you can do, I don't know if you're going to be piecing these by machine or by hand. You'd be dealing with a lot of Y seams if you're doing it by machine. One of the things that you can do is you can go in and you can mark your 1/4-inch seams. So you can mark those with a pencil, with a Hera marker, which is just a piece of sharpened plastic that marks a crease. And that way, you know, when you're going to piece those together, you can match up the intersection on each of the sides of that hexagon and make sure it's perfectly placed. And that's probably the best way I know to make sure that you don't stretch things out. Because, yeah, when you're doing a hexagon quilt, you do have lots and lots of bias. I need to plug my computer in.
All right, well, while you're working on that, our next question that came in, we have one from Suzanne, and she wants to know what the best size pin to use for applique is.
The best size pins?
Mm-hmm. So if you're going to pin and then you're trying to stitch around it, I mean, I know you're partial to silk pins.
Yeah, but you can buy little tiny applique pins, and the ones I like have a little, like a white rubbery end head to them, and they're about 1 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch long. Those are great pins, but there's something better, and that is glue. There is wonderful temporary basting glue. Roxanne's makes one, and there's a couple other ones. One's called So Easy, I think. And these are temporary basting glues. They're not permanent glues. They're very lightweight. You can also use Elmer's glue. That is, if you buy the one that is not the school glue, but they're archival glues, and thin it out with water and use it. That's wonderful, because you can put everything you're going to applique in place before you take your first stitch. And then you're not making all kinds of extra stitches in areas that are going to be underneath. A lot of people don't know this, but when I started my career in quilting, I designed applique quilt after applique quilt, and I've done tons of hand applique. And I call it glue-plicating. I love to glue things down before I stitch them. It just makes it so much easier. Just make sure you keep that glue away from that outside edge, because you don't want to have to stitch through the glue. And then, you know, I always launder when I'm done anyway, because I've had my hands on everything, and it comes out in the laundering. So either the little tiny pins that are about 3/4 of an inch long with a little white rubbery heads, and I think they're made by IBC, but I'm not sure, or just use glue and the wash-away temporary glue.
I can see the word glue-plicating starting to catch on now. I think it's a fun one to say.
Our next question, like glue-plicate a long time ago and still haven't stitched down.
Well, that's good to know that it does last that long, though, if you're not actively using it.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, our next question here says, do you make your starch or just buy an already made product?
For starch and press applique, you know, it's really funny. When my very first quilt I ever made was applique. My grandmother told me to go grab a potato and a sponge, and that is how I turned the edges, was with the starch from a potato. So, you know, you could always make your own. But I use liquid starch, and it's usually found on the bottom row, and I just buy the liquid starch, and you thin it out with water, and you paint it on with a paintbrush. If you don't want to buy the liquid starch because it's a pretty big container, you can buy the spray starch, spray it into a container, a little bowl, and let the surfactant that's the spray kind of dissolve until it's a liquid, and then use that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I do that. I spray it into the lid of the actual container. Yep. All right, we're coming down to the end, but we have time for one more question here, and this is about 1/4 inch seams. And Jackie says that she's struggling with learning to sew a scant 1/4 inch seam. She's currently working on a pattern which calls for that seam allowance, and she wants to know how you can gauge a scant 1/4 inch seam.
Okay, so if you have a 1/4 inch foot for your machine, a scant 1/4 inch is going to be so that when you position your fabric underneath the foot, you cannot see it. It doesn't hang out over the outside edge on the right. If you see that fabric hanging out past the foot, then that's going to be a chunky 1/4 inch. If the fabric is lining up right with the edge of the foot, that's going to be an accurate 1/4 inch. Now the reason why some patterns say a scant 1/4 inch is because they have lots of seams coming together, and when you press them, the pressing will kind of take up some of that fabric, and you're not going to get a perfectly sized block that way. So scant is what they do. Other people always use a scant so that they can go in and square up things and not lose their designs, like star tips and that sort of stuff. So if you've got a foot, then you want to have that fabric running just inside to the left of the edge of your 1/4 inch foot. If you don't have a 1/4 inch foot and you're having to figure out where that 1/4 inch line is, your best bet is to go and get moleskin that you use for blisters and stuff on your feet that has a sticky back that's supposed to be stuck into your shoe or whatever. The reason I say moleskin is because it's raised, and you're going to measure, you're going to use your measuring tape or whatever, exactly, you're going to put the needle in the down position, you're going to measure over to the right exactly a 1/4 inch, and you're going to stick your moleskin there. And when you do that, that gives you this edge to run your fabric against, and it can't go up over it because the moleskin is so thick. And that is the best way to really accurately monitor your 1/4 inch seam.
All right, and just a quick follow-up to that one, because I grew up hiking and we use moleskin all the time, and that stuff is really sticky. So can you get it back up off of there without leaving any sticky residue?
Alcohol.
Okay.
Yep, alcohol takes off stick. Yep.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering all of our questions tonight. Thank you everyone who submitted a question beforehand, who participated live during this last hour. I hope we got through all your questions, and I hope you learned something new, and I hope you start using the term duplique.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll see you guys next month.
Absolutely. All right. See you guys, everybody.
All righty. Bye-bye.